Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Big changes coming to solar and wind energy projects on federal lands and waters as a new order authorizes Interior Secretary Doug Burgum to personally approve all projects. What does this order mean for the energy industry, for solar panels flooding in from China, and what new energy sources could we see as a result? Joining us now to discuss is Mandy Gunasekara, former Chief of Staff at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Mandy, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you here. Now, first, how big of a deal is this that Burgum has to personally approve all wind and solar projects?
Yeah, it's a really big deal, and it's a really important step to investing in U.S. energy. You have to remember that a lot of the wind and solar, not necessarily the completed parts, but the supply chains, they come from places like China. So a lot of the renewable energy development, or what President Trump rightfully refers to as the Green New Scam, it was to the detriment of this country in the form of lost opportunity for U.S. energy resources and reduced grid reliability for your average consumer, while enriching countries like China and India that have poor employment practices as well as poor environmental standards. So this is a really big deal that Secretary Burgum will get an additional layer of review for some of these large projects, which frankly have gotten a free pass for far too long.
Now, critics are saying this isn't oversight, it's obstruction and will slow down one of the fastest growing sources of electric power. The Interior Department, meanwhile, says this order will level the playing field for coal and natural gas. Break down the implications of this order for the U.S. and how it will impact energy sources here.
Yeah, I think the characterization of leveling the playing field is much more accurate for what this actually does. Wind and solar have gotten a free pass for a long time in terms of permitting review and what is required in terms of developing, especially on federal lands, while coal and natural gas and oil have been subject to additional scrutiny. There shouldn't be the thumb on the scale from the federal government in terms of picking winners and losers. And actually, with Secretary Burgum making this decision, it's going to level that out. You have wind and solar that need to be subject to the same degree of scrutiny that your traditional energy resources are subject to. And that's going to be really important in terms of ensuring we have enough energy not only to meet today's electricity and energy demand, but what's expected, which is significant growth, especially alongside expectations for AI capabilities and the proliferation of cryptocurrency, which we'll continue to see after the president's announcement in the last few days on that front as well.
Now, this law will also phase out credits for wind, solar, and other so-called renewable energy while enhancing federal support for fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gas. Expanding on your earlier point, which industries are most likely to get hit, and could this impact the average household?
Well, I actually think it'll impact the average household in a positive way. Over the past 4 years, the average consumer has been dealing with the effects of a focus on wind and solar energy. And at the end of the day, they are fine energy resources for supplemental energy needs, but they were trying to use them for baseload capacity. And baseload is what keeps the grids running all the time in a reliable way and keeps them running in an affordable way. So the uptick in electricity prices and the lack of reliability, rolling brownouts, blackouts during times when Americans needed it the most, are a direct result of this over reliance and this federal preference for wind and solar. So, doing away with that federal preference is actually going to be good for the consumer. You're going to have more affordable, reliable sources like coal, oil, natural gas in particular, as well as expansion of nuclear and geothermal, some other alternative energy resources. That's going to be good for the taxpayer because they're not going to be as heavily subsidizing those energy sources, and even better for your average consumer. Now, of course, the solar development industry and wind industry, they've been so dependent on this federal preference in the form of tax credits as well as preferential permitting. They're likely going to see an impact to those industries. But as far as the consumer goes and the taxpayer, it is a net benefit.
Now, many industries, including solar, have been flooded by cheap products from China, as you mentioned earlier. How likely will this law deal a blow to these Chinese companies?
Oh, I think it'll be a very difficult position for companies that rely on supply chains from China. The president and his in his economic approach, he's not only trying to shore up U.S. energy resources, but also to bring back the manufacturing and supply chains of those various component parts. So I really think that this is going to be President Trump's effort to give U.S. industries an opportunity to take back some of those supply chains, especially when it comes to things like critical minerals. We're blessed with critical minerals in this country, but accessing them have been largely off limits by decisions over the past 4 years. So it's going to be a great boon for some of the critical mineral mining elements, the creation of component parts here in this country, and it's going to cut into what places like China have enjoyed for far too long, which is a massive control over these critical supply chains, which is not only great for energy, but also great for national security implications as well.
And Mandy, looking ahead, what new energy sources could we see spring up? You mentioned a little bit earlier, say technologies like nuclear, geothermal, even hydropower. How likely are we to see more of these sources power our future energy needs?
Well, I'm most excited about nuclear energy. There is just a ton of potential in building out the small nuclear reactors. President Trump has specifically talked about this, as well as some of his key folks, including the new Deputy Secretary for Energy at the Department of Energy, that are going to focus on supporting and developing out small modular nuclear reactors, which have such massive potential. They're safe, they're reliable, they're ultimately low cost once they're turned on, and they're good for the environment. You don't have to deal with a lot of the other trade-offs that you do with other energy sources. But also you see things like geothermal and hydro as well. I mean, these really have been put on the back burner in the last 4 years, and they have great potential as well. Again, satisfying what's most important when you're looking at energy grids, which is reliability and affordability. So we're going to see a great expansion of these industries because the president supports them and he has the people in place in key cabinet positions who understand the industries and understand how to help them really take off in a positive way.
Lots of changes for sure. Mandy Gunasekara, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.